"You're coming with me," he said. The words weren't a question, nor a plea. They dropped into the red dust like a hammer, a verdict, a command. I stood barefoot on the hard-packed earth, the hem of my dress torn and trailing behind me like a flag of surrender. My skin stung from the sun, my lips cracked and bloodied. Behind me, the wagon creaked as my late husband's kin sorted through the last of what they'd taken: chairs, linens, the iron skillet I'd seasoned for a decade. One of them even wore my dead husband's hat. The audacity didn't shock me anymore. The Graysons weren't grieving, they were harvesting, and I had been the final crop. "You've got no right," said Mal Grayson, his voice thick with spit and self-righteousness. He stood tall, narrow-eyed, beneath a coat too fine for a man with hands that clean. "She's Grayson property, owed to us, my brother's widow. You've no call to interfere." The man on the horse, Abel they called him, didn't answer right away. His face was like something carved into a cliff, sun-beaten, quiet, and unreadable. He sat his bay stallion like he'd been born there. Long coat, wide hat, a rifle sheathed just behind his right boot. I didn't know him. Not really. I'd seen him at a distance sometimes, riding fence, tending cattle, trading quietly in town. People said little about Abel Holt, except that he kept to himself, paid in coin, and never raised his voice. Now he pulled a wool blanket from his saddle, walked over, and held it out to me, not touching, not insisting, just letting it hang between us like a door I could choose to open or not. For a second, I didn't move. My body wouldn't cooperate. Then my fingers found the blanket, clutched it, wrapped it around my shoulders. It was scratchy, warm, and smelled faintly of cedar smoke. I still didn't look at him. My eyes were fixed somewhere beyond the horizon, where grief had made its nest and refused to leave. "She ain't yours to take," Mal said again, louder this time, more brittle. Abel didn't even blink. "You'll get off my land, now." There was a silence so wide it could have swallowed the canyon. Then the oldest Grayson spat in the dirt again. "Ain't worth the bullet," he muttered. He turned and climbed into the wagon. The others followed. They didn't look back. I watched their wheels leave furrows in the dust, leading away from everything that had been my life. Abel didn't say another word. He just waited until the wagon disappeared behind the rise. Then he turned to me and said, "We ride before the heat gets worse." I climbed up behind him, still silent, still hollow. His coat brushed against my arm. He gave a small click to the horse, and we moved, away from the border, away from the name they'd taken, and towards something unnamed. Something that wasn't kindness exactly, but it wasn't cruelty either. And for the first time in weeks, I let myself breathe. The road away from the border cut through open country, nothing but heat haze and the rustle of wind in the grass. We didn't speak. We didn't have to. His horse was steady beneath us, hooves thudding a rhythm into the earth that steadied something inside me. I hadn't been on horseback in years. My thighs ached and the blanket scratched my throat, but I didn't complain. After everything, silence felt like a gift. Even the flies left us alone. The man, Abel, rode like a man used to it, confident, balanced, always scanning the tree lines without looking like he was. His shoulders never slumped, his jaw never moved. I wondered if he'd even blinked since I got on the horse. We crested a bluff by sundown and saw his home below. It wasn't much, a small house, square and spare, with a lean-to barn and a thin line of fence running like stitches through the field. The porch sagged on one end, and the chimney leaned slightly east, but it was clean, cared for, and most importantly, it was empty of people. Abel dismounted first and offered a hand. I ignored it and slid down myself, almost stumbling when my legs gave. He didn't react,
just took the horse's reins and led it to the water trough. I followed, unsure what else to do. Inside, the house smelled of old wood, salt pork, and something faintly herbal, maybe sage. It was cool despite the heat outside. Shutters latched, clean floors, a narrow cot tucked in the corner, books stacked on a crate, a rifle mounted above the hearth. He pointed toward a small door off the main room. "That's yours. There's clothes in the trunk." I hesitated. He didn't add anything else, just removed his hat and coat, hung them by the door, and walked past me toward the kitchen. I heard a pan scrape, water boil, the sound of a single plate set on a wooden table. I went into the room. It was no bigger than a pantry, but it had a bed, a small mirror, a rug that looked hand-woven. The trunk at the foot of the bed creaked open to reveal 2 dresses, a petticoat, and a wool shawl folded neat. Someone had meant for a woman to stay here. I didn't ask. I didn't want to know who. When I came back out, wrapped in the shawl and the less tattered dress, he was ladling stew into 2 bowls. He'd already placed a cup of water at one seat, a small glass of something darker at the other. We sat. He didn't say grace, didn't make eye contact, just ate. I followed. The stew wasn't seasoned much, but it was hot, filling. I scraped the bowl clean and didn't even feel shamed for it. My hands were shaking when I drank the water. He stood up after he was done, took both bowls without a word, rinsed them with well water outside. I watched through the window. His back was as straight at the trough as it had been on the horse, like the man didn't know how to bend. When he came back in, he said only one thing. "House is locked at night. Dog sleeps by the porch. If you need to leave, tell me." Then he disappeared into the other room. A door shut. I sat alone for a long time. It wasn't kindness. He hadn't offered comfort or softness or answers, but it was quiet. It was safe. And for now, that was enough.
The next days came quiet as snowfall. Abel rose early. I heard the screen door creak before first light, the rhythm of boots on packed earth, the rustle of feed sacks and fence wire. He moved with the certainty of a man who'd done the same work for years and didn't need to rush it. No slamming, no cursing, just steadiness. He never asked where I came from, never demanded thanks, never said my name. I stayed inside those first mornings, letting the shawl hang from my shoulders as I explored the square box of a house. There wasn't much, no lace, no curtains, no woman's touch. But it was clean. The table was scrubbed, the hearth swept, books stacked with the kind of care that meant they were read more than once. In the back room, beside a cracked window, I found a shelf. On it sat 3 carved wooden birds. One had a broken wing. One was painted red, like a cardinal. The third was plain, but perfectly smooth, like someone had sanded it every night for a year. Next to them sat a photograph in a frame gone silver at the corners. A younger Abel, maybe 10 years ago. Arm around a boy about 15, brown hair, proud grin, missing tooth. Both of them squinting against the sun. The photo was clean, not dusty. Looked at, not forgotten. But it was the teacup that stopped me. It sat on the windowsill, chipped in 2 places, handle missing. Inside it, someone had placed a small feather. Not arranged, not decorative, just there. I touched it with 2 fingers, barely breathing. I'd had one just like it, back before I married Henry, when I still believed in flowers on the table and company on Sundays. It startled me how much comfort that broken ding gave, how it felt more like home than anything I'd touched in years. I stayed inside longer that day, turning the cup in my hands. By afternoon, the light changed, softer, warmer.
I stepped to the door just to feel it on my skin. That porch hadn't been swept in a week, and I don't know what got into me, but I found the broom and did it. Not out of thanks, not to earn my keep. I just wanted to do something that wasn't surviving. When Abel returned, sweat on his brow and blood on his cuff from a barbed wire nick, he paused at the sight of the swept boards. We didn't speak. He looked at me for a moment, then nodded once, slow, like the kind of man who never wasted words. The next day, I found a fresh pail of water by the door before I even rose. No explanations, no favors, just a small exchange of dignity. That night, I made cornbread with the last of the flour, left a slice on his side of the table without saying a word. He ate it without comment, but left the tin clean. The house breathed easier after that, like the space between us wasn't empty, but full of something quiet and mutual. Not affection, not yet, but maybe something steadier, maybe something that didn't need to be named.
It was midweek when I saw him, a rider, alone on the eastern ridge, silhouetted black against the pale sky, just sitting there, watching, still as a nail driven into the land. I was gathering wood for the stove, arms full of kindling, when I caught the movement, just a flicker. When I looked up, he'd already stopped moving. Didn't wave, didn't shout, just watched. I knew that posture. Men like that didn't visit neighbors or stop by for trade. That was a man sent to remind someone they'd been warned. I went inside, quiet and fast. Abel was at the table, oiling a hinge from the barn. He didn't look up when I came in, just said, "You saw him too?" I nodded. He reached behind his chair, brought up the long rifle, and laid it on the table like a loaf of bread. He didn't check if it was loaded. He already knew. "He's scouting," he said, measuring. I set the wood down by the hearth. "Will he come back?" Abel didn't answer right away. He took a small cloth and began wiping the barrel with the care of a man polishing a memory. He always do. That night, I couldn't eat. I sat at the window while Abel moved through his routines, checking the locks, stoking the fire, feeding the dog. The porch lantern swung gently in the wind, throwing shadows long across the yard. I didn't ask questions, didn't plead for plans or answers, but I watched him closely. He cleaned that rifle like a ritual, slow, exact, each movement methodical, like a sermon of metal and oil. He never looked rushed, never looked angry, but something cold had settled in his face, like a man done asking for peace. He set a second rifle by the door, just leaned it there like a cane, and I understood in that silent gesture what he meant. This house was no longer just a place of quiet. It had become a line, and we were standing on it. That night, I didn't sleep in the small room. I sat by the hearth with a blanket and the broken teacup in my hands. Abel didn't send me back. He just nodded when he saw me, placed the second cup of water near mine, and went to his own bed. Neither of us said a word about the man on the ridge. Neither of us needed to. Whatever was coming, it was ours now. Not in the way of lovers, not in the way of soldiers, but in the way of two people who had seen what others were willing to take and decided they would not be taken quietly.
The northern sky turned black fast. Clouds rolled over the hills like a tide, thick and heavy with rain. I was bringing in the wash when the first drop hit my forehead. By the time I stepped onto the porch, Abel was already tying down the gate and barking something low to the dog, who vanished toward the barn. Thunder cracked in the distance, not angry yet, but coming. He passed me without a word, heading to the back shed. I followed without thinking. That's when we heard it, the panicked bleating of a ewe, sharp and frantic through the wind. Not the usual cry of a spooked animal. This was pain. Abel didn't hesitate. He grabbed his oilskin coat and looked at me, eyes flat and urgent. "Need you to hold the lantern." I nodded before I knew I meant to. We cut across the pasture just as the rain started, a cold spit that turned quick into sheets. The barn door groaned open under his hand. Inside, the air was hot with wet hay and the smell of blood. The ewe lay on her side, legs twitching, eyes rolled white. Her belly was taut, shaking. Abel crouched without hesitation, rolling up his sleeves, fingers already moving along the animal's stomach. I stood beside him, lantern raised, both hands gripping it tight. "Hold it steady," he said. I did. The storm banged outside like fists on the door, but all I could focus on was the slow, careful way his hands worked. He murmured to the animal, not soft, but firm. Comfort through control. The ewe screamed once, then again. Blood slid onto the straw. My arms ached from holding the lantern high. My fingers trembled, but I locked them tighter. "Don't drop it," he muttered. "I won't." Then, in one sharp motion, he pulled. A slick, motionless lamb hit the straw. Abel rubbed it rough with a burned-up cloth, fast and brutal, like trying to wrestle life back into its body. The storm screamed again. Then the lamb coughed. A thin, wet bleat cracked through the barn. And I exhaled for the first time in what felt like hours. Abel sat back on his heels, arms red, face unreadable. I lowered the lantern. "You done that before?" he asked. "No," I said. He looked at me. Just looked. "You held like you had." I didn't know what to say to that. We walked back in silence. My shawl was soaked through, my dress clinging to my skin, but I didn't shiver. Inside, he built a fire. I changed behind the bedroom door, then came out wrapped in dry wool. He was pouring hot water into 2 tin cups. I sat beside him, took mine. It was the first time we sat shoulder to shoulder. I looked at him and said, "Thank you." He didn't nod, didn't blink, but he replied, "Storm's easing." And maybe he meant more than the one outside.
The sky turned purple the day they came back. Thunderheads hung heavy over the ridge, same as before, but this time the storm was riding horses. 3 of them, Graysons. Mal in the lead, his face set like stone, freshly chiseled. The younger one, Clay, I think, rode tight at his side, rope looped over his saddle horn. The third I didn't know, but he looked like trouble made flesh. All 3 wore guns like they meant to use them. I was sitting on the porch steps, peeling apples. The moment I saw their figures on the rise, my knife paused mid-slice. Abel stepped outside a breath later, wiping his hands on a rag. He didn't ask me to move, just stood by the post, watching them descend. When the horses stopped in front of the house, Mal spat into the dirt and said, "We've come to collect what's ours." He didn't even look at me. Abel didn't answer, just crossed his arms. "You don't want trouble, Mal. You've had her long enough." My chest locked up, the air around me thinned. Clay leaned forward in his saddle, eyes flicking to the rope. "Law's still law, Abel. Widows got no claim. You know that." Still, Abel said nothing. Mal shifted in his saddle, voice growing colder. "She's not your problem. She's ours. Always was." That's when Clay dismounted. He moved like someone used to scaring things smaller than him, kicked dust in his stride, fingers twitching too close to his belt. He stepped forward, rope in hand, and said, "Don't make me reach for her." I couldn't breathe. My knees locked. My hands were cold even in the heat. Then Abel moved. He stepped down the porch, slow and sure, never raising his voice. "Turn around." Clay smirked. "Or what, you gonna shoot me in front of witnesses?" Abel didn't answer. He just walked. When Clay reached for the rope, Abel drew. One shot. It hit Clay in the leg, clean, deliberate. He howled and dropped like a sack of wheat. The horses reared. Mao pulled his gun halfway, then saw Abel still aimed steady and true. "Leave," Abel said, "and don't come back." Mao stared for a long time. Then he holstered his weapon, yanked Clay up by the collar, and turned his horse. No threats, no words, just defeat, bitter and silent. They rode off slow, dragging Clay behind like a carcass tied to pride. I stood frozen. Abel reloaded calmly, holstered the gun like it was just another tool. He didn't look proud. He didn't gloat. He just climbed the steps, brushed a fleck of dust from his sleeve, and said, "You all right?" I nodded. I wasn't sure it was true, but I nodded. He took the apple from where it had rolled, handed it back. We went inside as the thunder cracked above us, and the first fat drops of rain began to fall. The ranch had been a refuge before. Now, it was a line drawn in blood, and Abel Holt had declared it defended ground.
After the standoff, the world didn't go quiet. It deepened. Like the air itself had shifted, settling into something thicker. Not with fear, with meaning. The next morning I was up before the rooster. I swept the porch again, slow and deliberate. Not because it needed doing, but because it was mine now, too. Abel didn't say anything when he saw me there, just handed me a cup of mint water and went off to check the south fence. But that small thing, a fresh leaf floating in cool water, meant more than any words he could have offered. We didn't speak much after that. We didn't have to. There was too much to do. The fence needed mending, the coop was sagging, a saddle strap had split and needed stitching. Abel showed me where the needle and wax thread were. I fixed it without being asked. That same day, I saw him hanging the shirts I'd washed, wrong side out, sleeves dragging the dirt. I didn't correct him. I just took them down, refolded the line, and hung them again proper. He didn't comment, but the next time, he watched how I did it. In the evenings, we'd sit out on the porch in the gold of the fading sun. The land rolled wide and warm in every direction, and the silence between us wasn't hollow anymore. It was full. One evening after supper, I finally told him. Not everything, just enough. I told him how Henry, my late husband, had been a soft man, a good man in his own way, but too weak to stand against his brothers, too eager to please. I told him how they'd bled us dry, then buried him with more gold than he ever owned, while they stripped me of the rest. I said it plain, with no tears. Abel didn't interrupt, didn't shift in his chair. When I finished, he said, "That's done then," and passed me the coffee pot. We drank without sugar. A few days later, I found the teacup again. I'd moved it to my room at some point, didn't know why. That morning, I washed it carefully, then glued the chipped pieces back in place. Not perfect, but whole enough to hold. Then I took it outside, filled it with wildflowers I'd picked from the edge of the stream, and set it in the center of the kitchen table. He saw it that evening, paused for a second too long, but he didn't say anything. Next morning, I found a second mug beside the pot. 2 chairs pushed close together, and something in my chest finally settled. Not everything was fixed.
The past still sat in the corners of my mind like dust in sunbeams. But for the first time in years, I had a place that stayed steady under my feet. A place where I worked because I chose to. And a man who didn't claim me, but made space beside him without asking.
The first frost came quiet. One morning in late autumn, I stepped out with my shawl clutched tight and found the grass silvered, the world hushed beneath a veil of cold. The air had that clean bite to it, the kind that clears the past right out of your lungs. By then, the routine had shaped itself around us like old boots. Abel chopped wood, I stacked it. I kneaded bread while he fixed hinges. We didn't talk much, but the quiet had turned warm, comfortable. I don't know when he started calling me by my name, just that the first time he did, it stopped me in my tracks. "Lena," he'd said one afternoon, handing me a pair of gloves he'd mended with thick thread. "You'll need these." I took them without reply, but that night I cried a little into the pillow. Not from sadness, just the simple ache of being seen again. Winter hit hard. A snowstorm rolled through and left us stranded for 6 days. We boiled beans, read old books, and played two-handed poker by lantern light. He never let me win. I respected that. When spring finally pushed its fingers through the soil, we planted rows together. Corn, potatoes, squash. I watched his hands press seeds in the dirt like someone teaching the land how to breathe again. One morning, standing out by the fence line, I asked him, "Do you miss them?" He didn't pretend not to know who I meant. "My brother," he said after a long pause, "went off to war, came back angry, died with his boots on in Missouri. The boy in the photo, my nephew, raised him for 5 years. What happened? He chose a gun instead of staying. Wrong men, wrong trail. Buried him out near the bluff." I didn't ask more. He didn't offer. But something heavy in the air cracked and drifted away like old ash. Late that spring, after the first blooms of wild clover, we stood on the porch one evening and looked out toward the ridge where the Graysons had once appeared. It was empty now, just sky and soft wind. He said, "They're not coming back." I know. The sun dipped low, brushing the land in gold. I reached for his hand. He didn't flinch, just laced his fingers with mine. It wasn't a vow, not the kind with rings or oaths. It was quieter than that. But it held. And for us, that was enough.